Welcome to The Middlemen. I'm Tom Limongello, and I'm here with Todd Sawicki. We, as middlemen, live at the intersection of media and e-commerce, and we would like for you to join us in our discussions where we turn that chaotic intersection into your comfort zone.
Well, welcome to another episode of The Middlemen. And this week, we're going to be talking about a company that it's maybe some of you have heard of, maybe not, Thrasio. And Thrasio is a really fascinating company. It is a startup of sorts, even though they've raised, I think, like $1 billion.
They've actually raised four, which
Okay,
is
that's
kind of
insane.
crazy.
So they've raised $4 billion as a startup. And what they're doing is they were acquiring a bunch of startup brands, Amazon brands, these D2C startups. What did they buy? I think they bought like 100. How many have they bought, Tom?
They bought 200,
Okay,
which,
that's
when we heard
right.
this,
Oh,
it
and they
was,
bought 200 over what, the course of like 2 to 3 years?
basically they were around for a couple of years and they were buying something like two companies a week.
Jesus, right? So this is like 200 from zero to $4 billion, zero to 200 brands. And you're looking at the landscape of the buy side, something again we want to focus on a little bit. This could be one of the next Unilever. When was the last time we saw somebody even get to that scale? Like how many brands is, Tom, you've got a background in Unilever.
Yeah,
Have you
they
come to
actually,
Unilever?
so what's funny is I started my career at Unilever and they were always I always learned how they swallowed a bunch of brands and then they rationalized them down and shut down plants and brands and made it into a very small number. So like, I remember when I was there, we were trying to get to Foods 9, so 9 brands. But right now they have 400 brands. And so they're a huge company, but it's also foods, home products, ice cream. So it's a large scope.
But even then, if we look at it from the perspective of they're already at 200 brands, right? They're halfway to being a Unilever.
Yeah. And they were
Right?
only at their max market cap was somewhere between 5 and 10 billion. It was all on paper because they were a private company. But you look at Unilever, and that's a $145 billion company. So they're basically 14 times bigger at their highest. And they only had 400 brands. So 200 brands for a $10 billion company is nuts.
So so the point of this is there's these companies, like what does the buy side look like? And there's these emergent next gen Unilevers, next gen CPG companies. And I think that's what Thrasio has potential to be. And so one of the things that if you're selling, we've had a bunch of sell side people on so far, and that's been our focus. And you and I have that background in the sell side
Yep.
more recently, even though you have both, right? You're a two-way player in this regard. And from a sell side perspective, I think it's really important that we're going to be in the future talking to more buy side representatives and hearing the story of Thrasio and how they think about their business and how they plan to grow their business, and is going to be really insightful to anyone in the sell side in this space. How do these people think, and where are they coming to, and how do they look at these retail platforms, and what is their size and scale and structure? There's a lot we can learn. One of the benefits of Tom and I, you and I were at CES, is we got a chance to meet some of the representatives of brands selling to the retailers, and they were less than complimentary of retail media. They really think they're struggling to make it work for them, and they feel like it's being shoved down their throat. So we're really going to make this the next gen of the future of online advertising. There's some work we got to do as a sell side industry, and some work to make this successful.
Yeah. And now
It's really fast.
remember, in this case, you have Dave Johnson, who worked with me at Quotient. So he was on the other side, but he started his career at P&G. So he's also a switch hitter like I am. And that's going to be a very tough customer, which is why you're going to hear in this interview that he might say something like, it's a choice of whether or not we want to be at the retailer.
Well, and I think but by the way, the Quotient Mafia is insane across this whole online What, a third of the people we've talked to, maybe half, have some tie to Quotient. It's
It's definitely made it easy to set this podcast in motion.
But. Well, for sure, but these people are critical people across the
industry. They're popping up everywhere now
and,
as CEOs of
CEOs,
new companies,
heads of sales. Like, it's amazing. The background, I think we're clearly going to look at the Quotient Mafia as the equivalent to the PayPal Mafia in the startup tech ecosystem for retail media. It's really a fascinating pool of folks. And so yet another one. I think Dave's doing some really interesting stuff with Thrasio. And by the way, Thrasio hit some bumpy waters, and we're going to hear their story. Tom and I got from our last place we worked together at Fantastic, which was in the Shopify ecosystem, and we were starting to build the beginnings of a retail media platform for that. And Thrasio was the darling of the startup D2C space. And so we as outsiders were like aware of it, and we're aware as a roll up they ran into some problems, some funding problems, they swallowing and learning how to rationalize the 200 companies they bought. It turned out to be a lot harder than I think they thought. And so they
Yeah,
had
and they were Amazon only, and so we're going to go into a lot of detail about what it's like to think outside of just the online world and think about the retail world, but also think about what is it like to manage insurgent brands or online brands that have big creator followings, ones where influencers are actually potentially doing stuff on behalf of the brand without any direction from this insurgent brand. So like just people out there making videos of these brands that maybe have strong claims. So all those types of things, all those trends that we see happening in social and other areas, those types of trends, insurgent brands are actually using those. I think the retailers are, they realize that those trends are there and they are actually looking to see if they can bring those brands into the store. David would tell us about like Walmart's Project Milky Way. There's all this chatter around Walmart and other retailers starting to look outside of the data that they have to try to find these online brands. But are they going to get them to come in? Well, these retailers have really strict pricing. They have really strict timing on when you can get in there. You have to invest in retail media. All these things make it hard. So it's a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, there's a lot to I think learn from Dave. Again, him like you, Tom, being having worked both sides of the equation is really fascinating.
Yep.
And as retail media builds up, I think there's a lot to learn from this conversation and a lot to take away. And I think anyone who sells to that will enjoy watching this episode.
All right, let's get into it. We are here with Dave Johnson. Dave, thank you for joining us. We worked together when you were at Quotient. You ran sales there. I knew before that you were at P&G working on the Duracell brand. You worked on their Power Relief program. And then I'm definitely going to be excited to hear any sort of military analogies. I know you're a West Point graduate, but we reconnected because you were recently named Chief Transformation Officer at Thrasio, a company that I knew about in the e-commerce space a few years ago. And then by the time we got you to join us, you've become the CEO. First, thank you for coming. We wanted to ask you, what is Thrasio? Tell us about the company and about its meteoric rise and fall.
Thanks for the invite, Tom. And sorry it took so long to reconnect, but Tom and I had a fun run together at Quotient, building retail media. And those are definitely some moments that I remember and will continue to remember for a long time.
By the way, it is amazing how many people across the online retail landscape came out of Quotient. It's like a huge part of the middleman is just it's the journey through Tom's Quotient Rolodex. And you're another great example of it's amazing how some companies really become like the foundational spores that spread and really help create an industry. And it's just the amount of super amazing, talented people who came out of Quotient and are doing great things and interesting things like you and Thrasio. I'm really curious to hear what's going on there. Came out of Quotient. So it's just fun to see this and see how that company really gathered an amazing group of people.
Yeah, it was a great run, and it's always exciting to be on the front end of innovations. I had an old boss at Procter & Gamble that used to say, "Pioneers take a lot of arrows," right?
Yep.
You just have to make sure it doesn't hit you in the heart. And we were pioneers on that front. And it was a great time. I would like to think, too, that our retail partners we worked with, they learned a lot with us through that process as well. And so it's been fun to watch that industry grow and the turn that we saw towards retailers running their own platforms and being enabled enough to do it was not something that we saw when we started. And the fact that they were able to get up to speed the way they did and to build what they built. I know a lot of us at Quotient that were involved also take some real pride in that as well. So now I'm at Thrasio, as you mentioned, and it's been quite a story to get my arms around with the company. For a little bit of background on who the company is, it's this story of crazy takeoff and also a crazy crash of the company, but now a rebuild and a resurgence into the company, which is really exciting. And it's not very common in someone's career as all the folks that are involved with Thrasio now to be part of a company that is truly in a turnaround that is this visible. So it's a really exciting time to be there.
Just so that the listeners who aren't so familiar, what was it in the beginning? I know there's lots of acquisitions, but tell us a little bit what it was, and then where are we now?
Yeah. So the model in the first place was this concept of an Amazon aggregator. The idea was that the company had a central factory per se, right, where it had platforms, tech platforms. For us, it was in the areas of pricing and replenishment or ordering and marketing, and there were others as well. But these platforms effectively work together functionally and enable this central nervous system for the company per se, that they could adopt any brand or most brands or most ASINs or SKUs into this factory, and they would leave the back end of the factory better off than they were when it began. Right. So the same factory concept is repeated in many other places, right? I came from the data world prior. It was data analytics. It was a similar story there. There was a central factory, data came in, got pieced together, delivered out on the back end as analytics. Very similar type of story. Thrasio, when it began, actually was one of the, in some places we'll say it was but was one of the fastest tech unicorns in the US. And it went from, at the right time or at an important time around the time of COVID, was all of a sudden seen probably as the leader in the space, and became a target for private equity to come and invest. And those investments came in upwards around $4 billion of investments came into the company. And the purpose of those investments were to build this company to become the company of the future. It was valued around between $5 to $10 billion at the time. And the idea is with this investment, they'd go out and they'd buy these brands. They'd get with the company mindset of as many brands into the network as possible that fit within the investment criteria. And through that time, built up over 200 brands.
Wow. Okay. It was a lot, but I don't know.
Yeah, no,
200 is a
it's
lot.
200 brands and $4 billion is just massive, right? I don't think people who are loosely familiar with Thrasio, and Tom and I were, in terms of our e-commerce background at Fantastic, we're aware that Thrasio had acquired a lot, but 200 is a ton. And I think there's a lot of challenges around what that means in terms of how do you pull that together? Because since we bumped into Thrasio, being in our former space in the Shopify Amazon ecosystem, was that it was just herding cats over there. 200 brands, trying to get them all, like 200 Amazon accounts, 200 warehouses, 200 logistics pipelines. Like the promise of this add brands to a consolidated back end or a consolidated logistics stack sounds good, but it really sounds like they struggled to a large extent to actually execute on that strategy. And here we are today, almost with you being the one to maybe deliver on that promise today.
Look, I can't name any company that I'm aware of that could operate and operationally integrate that many companies at that speed. Right.
Yeah, my experience at Unilever was they wanted to rationalize ice cream down or foods down to 9 brands or something. It was like the idea of having that many that would have been all the supply chain guys have been salivating to how to shut everything down. So,
how many brands does like Unilever have? They probably only have a couple hundred brands on a global basis, right? Like the idea of having 200 brands is, I don't think people really understand just the enormity of that. Because if Unilever is trying to get down to 9 brands in ice cream, they probably only have a couple hundred brands total that they keep at any one point in time. Is that fair?
I would say they have far less than that number.
So 200 is a lot. That's crazy, right? When you think about that, that's really interesting. I don't think people understand the scale. Like when we say 200 brands, that's a huge number.
It's an enormous number. And again, part of the question about how you operate those many brands is start getting into the depths of a fair amount of those were products being shipped from China. So your supply chain becomes extremely complex. You start figuring out how many full container loads versus partial container loads do you have, and that makes material difference in your P&L. The number of warehouses where you store your goods, warehouses that may look like someone's garage, and how do you manage inventory totals when you don't have all the systems to track them and all these things. So all of these things can get out of hand very quickly.
Yeah, but you had private equity investors, so it all would have just gotten fixed at that point.
I would tell you that this would be a very difficult endeavor for anyone to get their arms wrapped around.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that because there was an open letter out there from Oak Tree Capital Management where they assumed that this would have been run better, even though they had white shoe firms involved. It sounds like from this discussion so far that it was very difficult, even if you consider the fact that it was a new world, like you say. It's brands coming from, like, supply coming in from China or whatever. It was just broke all the rules, it seems.
Yeah, look, I think it was and I think it still is, by the way, it's a very exciting industry and it's a very exciting new area of opportunity.
Let's get to that then. Like, what is, now that you're at the helm, what is the new strategy? And tell us a little bit about how you're going about changing what's the focus.
Yeah. So two-part strategy. Number one has been a lot of the work we've been doing. It's a lot of the work that I came in to do on the transformation side, which is simplifying a very complex business. Okay. So what I didn't share before is the company emerged from bankruptcy earlier in around mid 2024. So that time frame between unicorn to emerging from bankruptcy was around 4 years, that all this huge uptick and then quick downtick happened. So again, had a very complex business. We had gone through bankruptcy, and through part of the bankruptcy process, it really enables a very quick transformation on how your assets are now valued, et cetera. We went through a process to really speed up the process of reducing our 3PL position. The company at one time had over 300 warehousing positions. We're now down under 10. I believe we're at 9.
Oh, wow.
And we're getting down to 4 by the middle of this year. It'll be 2 domestic and 2 offshore positions.
And again, for those listening, 300 is insane. I can't even imagine how you imagine a team of people just to call and find all the people at the working at. Just holy crap, that's just astronomical.
And then on the cost base, to understand what inventory you need on those, some of them have inventory systems that you can track automatically, and some of them you have to audit. And so now every time you have to audit, there's incremental costs that go into the system, right, and it balloons out really quickly.
Can't even imagine. I'm getting the heebie-jeebies just thinking about managing that diverse a network of suppliers and 3PL, like ulcers. This is just, oh my God.
So you're talking about reducing costs. That's one part of it, right?
Yeah, that's one part of it. And that goes top down with the company. That's also simplifying your portfolios. So we also went through the process to sell off some brands that were not fitting directly into our go forward strategy as a company. We also went through processes to reduce our legal entities. You think our warehousing reduction is crazy? You should see the legal entity changes that we've had to make as well. So again, significant changes in our overall business. It goes down to selling accounts on Amazon, goes down to our vendor accounts at retailers. Tons of work to go and simplify the business from a very complex base. So think of that part of the business that says, hey, this is how we get profitable as a company. This is how we produce cash as a company, is through that simplification work. The second part of it is brand growth. And so we're very fortunate as a company, through the aggregation phase of our company and now to a brand phase of our company, is we both acquired and built some very strong brands. Okay. Which we're very fortunate to have those brands, because those become the core of our business going forward. And those core businesses are in a handful of categories that allow us to now position ourselves as a consumer goods company that has a category focus, with the focus of really creating winning competitive brands that make everyday tasks enjoyable for our consumers.
Is the plan then that it sounds like, right, to an outsider? I'm not like you and Tom have backgrounds in the CPG space and that world. From an outsider's perspective, I would say, oh, you're looking to build the next Unilever and P&G and maybe the new age version of that. We haven't seen a large CPG company emerge at that scale in, I want to say 40, 50 years, maybe 75 years. And it seems like there's an opportunity. I get maybe the thought behind the beginnings of Thrasio and its competitors at the time, because it wasn't the only one in the Amazon aggregator space, was, oh, we can go build the next gen Unilever P&G. Is that what you guys are thinking, or is it slightly different?
Slightly different, but we do all play in the same space. I guess the other term is, I hope to say to you someday that we all bid for the same space on a shelf at a key retailer, right? We have to be competitive with those brands if and where we play with them in their categories. But hey, the difference comes in this. There are some real benefits to being a digitally native brand. There are some real benefits of growing up on Amazon and in D2C. There are some real benefits to hearing directly from your consumer in a very fast digital way and innovating on your product very quickly. It's almost this idea, like I left CPG because I maybe have a short attention span, but I lost patience a bit with the speed at which CPG moved. And when I returned back into CPG after being in tech and data for a handful of years, what got me really excited about this company is this concept of CPG, but CPG moving at the speed of technology. Okay. So at Thrasio, we do innovate quickly. We have partners that allow us to innovate quickly. We have insights from consumers that give us the reason to innovate quickly. And I believe that's a true differentiator in the marketplace. There are things that work really well in the CPG, the big CPG, as you were talking about, handbook. I know those handbooks pretty well. We have to do those. That's the foundation of doing great consumer goods. But there are also things on the agility side and the speed side that companies like ours are just uniquely able to do differently than those type of big companies.
Is this the show and tell time? Show us some packaging or what? Give us some examples.
Example I like to give is we have a product called Hate Stains, and fantastic product. If you haven't used it,
I bought some.
it's here. Miss Mouths.
Cheers.
So great product. I'm not sure if I can say it's a miracle worker, but it sure feels like one. This product already in this size bottle, we have other sizes as well, but this size bottle is already pretty portable and you can stick it in a bag and take it with you. But we also developed along with it another fit format based on consumer insights. And that new fit format is a wipe. Okay. And so if I were to use the other common product in the market in a pen form, that product, number one, doesn't necessarily fit into a pocket as easy as a wipe. I actually have some. I was using some the other day on my daughter got a new sweatshirt and had a stain on it. So this fit of a wipe, right? It's very fits everywhere you need it to be. Great first moment of truth. If I can,
would you call that a sachet? I used to love all these CPG terms.
What?
You call that a sachet? Was it like, I remember.
I don't know that one.
Unilever was very international. So I remember with Hindustan Lever, they would have shampoo in sachets or packages like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's probably similar packaging to that. Yeah. This is more the towelette side. But so anyway, so this product, first moment of truth, again, very portable, very, very usable. Second moment of truth, when you actually use the product, it works great. It can work miracles, yet it doesn't leave all of the messy halo effect, and it dries very quickly. And all these things come out of insights that you see about these type of competitive products. And if you can quickly mine insights, and you have the ability and the partners to then go and turn that insights into a product, and you can do it quickly, it's a major game changer in the market. And look, I believe it's a path forward, and it's continuing to be a path forward for insurgent type brands.
Those insurgents are getting those benefits because they're in a highly competitive online marketplace where there's lots of ratings and reviews, whereas on the store shelves, you're stuck with the packaging. Or is that sort of where that's coming from?
Yeah, it's where it starts. And look, it's also, I would say the more digital focused brands, or let's say the digital native brands, have a reason to form a relationship with a consumer in a digital format from the get-go. Brands that introduce digital second don't always use that platform for the same reasons, right? They can get trapped into what does my retailer think of that, and et cetera. And what we're finding that the digital first space is very much an avenue that big retailers are watching, and they're watching it very closely. And so it just feels like the world is turning here on how brands get discovered and what it takes to really run a successful brand. And I think that we're on the forefront of doing some really cool things on that front.
Are you seeing that online digital native retail migrate to in-store? Recently, Tom and I talked about this in an earlier episode. Target now has an app, a Shopify app. And the point of it is it's really meant as a research function. So if you install it, they can see your Shopify stats and allows their merchandisers basically to discover. It's really and as a discovery product for the merchandisers. And because Shopify stats aren't public, it's not like Amazon, right? Decentralized platform. Is that something where you're starting to see the Targets and Walmarts come knocking at your door when they see something on Amazon or whatever storefront and wanting to pull things in store? Is that now starting to happen in a bigger way?
Yeah, without a doubt. It's too big to not pay attention to anymore. And I'll give the example, and this goes back a little bit in my time, but I was running brand marketing at Walmart for Gillette. And I remember I was seeing like a point per year starting to disappear out of the Nielsen ratings, or out of the Nielsen numbers. And you start digging into what's happening here. Where's this 1% going? And it becomes the emergence of, at that time, brands like Harry's and brands like Dollar Shave, right? And whereas you couldn't measure them completely, you knew where they were going. And
Right.
but it sent this kind of a bit of an awakening within this data set to say, hey, this isn't all encompassing. It's not all inclusive. There's something else going on here. What do I do about it? And I would tell you right now, very much like I was in that state back in 2010 years later, retailers are trying to get as strong as a grip on what's going on in the third party markets as they possibly can, right? And it's really fascinating. A lot of the questions that we get when we'll be out talking with large retailers, it almost comes down to this degree of, hey, how are you what's really going on, and how did you do it? How'd you get hundreds of thousands of reviews on a pillow?
Yeah, this is the part I wanted to dig into a little more, because I think there's this amazing online momentum that you have, but that's not just the fact that it's on Amazon, it's the creators or the influencers that are powering some of this, right? I think you mentioned when we were chatting before, the Miss Mouths brand, there's like somebody smearing their sheets with blackberries.
Yeah, look, people love again, with Miss Mouth, there's a degree of a miracle worker on it, and people want to go out and prove it. They either want to prove it right or they want to prove it wrong, but we're seeing a lot of these prove right moments where someone will
Okay.
go on and, to your point, someone had white sheets. Someone on my team showed me this a couple of weeks ago, had white sheets and took blackberries and was smudging blackberries into their white sheets. Why? I don't know. Like, they weren't a partner of ours. I guess they were doing it just to prove that it worked.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the online culture of trying to create controversy.
Yeah.
Builds traffic, builds this following, but then there's also the thought about it builds this following on Amazon. And I think what we were talking about earlier, whatever, what does it look like when you try to bring those brands with these followings into mass retail? What are the challenges there?
Yeah, well, so I'll hit on that. There's a big hurdle to do that, but I want to make sure I share more on this concept of real people going out and effectively demoing and testing your product. So back in my old days, if I was in CPG, you spent a lot of money to get those products demoed. You spend a lot of time to get those products demoed. It turns into a claim, which then on shelf will be a reason that someone will buy a product over another, right? Job is making me question all of those things. right? The validity of all those things, because there's such a power when people on their own can go and be the voice of your claim and can prove your claim versus you doing it yourself. There's a trust factor that comes with an influencer in that environment that is that, again, I don't know how to put a value to it, but I can tell you on the brands that go truly viral, it's one of those factors that happens in every single one of them. And it's not just happening on brands like Miss Mouths, it's happening. There's cleaning brands that I follow that I'm seeing the same thing happen. It's really remarkable to watch. So there's this special thing that we do in this space between affiliate and influencer, which is a unique thing that this company figured out during its phase on how to raise digital brands. And it's really a powerful tool.
Before you get into sort of getting into retail, then there's a discussion about those influencers and creators. I'm seeing people talk about in-store media. So you got guys like Andrew Lipsman saying that the best ROI you're ever going to see, or the best ROAS, is going to be an end cap with a digital screen on it. And after Walmart did their time well spent campaign to try to pull the screens out of just the electronics section into the grooming section or apparel and other places, now you have the ability to do that. And the first thing I was thinking was like, what are they going to throw their 30-second commercials in there? Probably not. Influencers could finally have a place in the store to voice those claims or assign signage up of those claims if you don't want audio or whatever. But there's lots of opportunities to do that. Do you see that happening, or is that something that's just too early?
At the end of the day, a lot comes down to who makes decisions on what content can be where. If I were advising a retailer, knowing that this is a big hurdle that a retailer takes, so if I go back to one of my old jobs, I think the most important question for them to ask is, what is it about the online environment that makes someone make a decision on a product and gets them excited to buy it? And how do I bring that to life here? I don't think it's a bestseller badge. I don't think it's a most number of items or units moved in the last X of time. I do think there's some real value to the number of positive ratings that a product gets. I do think there's something to positioning when it's on that shelf or on that digital shelf that really matters. I'm having all these things re-examined right now within Thrasio. Right. There was an old book on how to sell things on Amazon. And I tend to think that the Amazon world is also, we got to look at that uniquely different than maybe we did in the past. Both sides have a big hill to climb. Okay. Large retail stores have a hill to climb that they want to integrate the popular, convenient digital environment where there's a lot of data available to make decisions. They want to integrate, they got to find a way to integrate that into their system, right? They want to find a way to take brands that are doing well in Amazon and bring them into their retail environment. At the same time,
is it easy to do that? I think that's one of the things that, why don't we see more of these brands showing up in Walmart and Target or Thrasios? Is it just, are they afraid of it, or are there other sort of structural issues that are preventing this migration from digital storefronts to physical storefronts?
Both. It's not traditional. It's not the traditional way of doing business. And I think for the retailers that are really going to figure this out, they're going to do it by going in and trying some things with some partners with companies that know how to do it online. And it may not happen in year one. It may not happen in year two, right? This is a journey, but this is a big hill to climb. And I think the only way for them to fully break through in this world is you have to take some tries, and they may not always work, and it may be done in a non-traditional way. So as an example, let's say there's a product that is selling on Amazon, and let's say that product, if you moved it into your aisle, was a 2x more expensive, right? The price was 2x more expensive than the next competitor. The immediate response for most retailers will tend to be like, no, that can't be that expensive. We have to reduce price, right? I have to get it within a certain margin compared to or a certain threshold compared to the other product. Because if I have that product at that 2x price, it's just not going to sell, and we're not going to go through the number of units per week per store, and it's just not going to work.
This is also just the buyer doesn't seem like they're doing their job. It's almost like the procurement function or something.
Yeah, partly, right? It tests everything,
Right.
right? But maybe that product at a 2x that's already successfully selling on Amazon at a 2x, maybe that product could come and actually lift your category. Maybe that product could actually come and do all the things that you want it to do in your store. But man, it's really hard, and I understand this completely. It's really hard to integrate that into your current system. And that's where I think the real problem is probably generating from, is just the change that it creates, because these are two very different environments, and it's just not an easy pick and replace model.
I think that's what people, as a non-retail background, my background's on the digital media side. So I get into retail media coming from a guy who's been in ad tech and martech for 20 years. And I look at retail and go, it seems like you could just, if I'm the Target merchandiser, yeah, I just go to Miss Melts and you guys, and suddenly it's in store. And hearing from you today, it's no, Todd. It's actually way more complicated than you think. And those structural issues, I think, are fascinating to learn about. That there's the ways of doing business have to change, and the way they need to think about doing business. They can't just pluck a product and drop it in. And that might be one of the limitations, because you're right in terms of Miss Melts is a hugely popular brand on Amazon, online. To your point about the influencers smearing blackberries on the sheets, by the way, one of the fascinating things about getting into the world of online retail has been learning about the emergence of things like TikTok shops and those creator videos and their impact and how they drive huge amounts of sales, which has really interesting implications for the future of retail media and how you leverage that and how you turn those into creatives and ads. I think that's one of the next big evolutions, is how do you take and turn, and you're beginning to see these like on YouTube, right? You see these creator commercials showing up, but you're not seeing them necessarily in retail media just yet as much. I do think, to Tom's comment about the in-store experience, and do we pull those in, and is that the future retail media? Putting that BlackBerry video in an end cap seems like that's a natural extension of what we're doing. But to pull that off, there's so many things that have to change and evolve. And I think this is a fascinating lens into not just it's the future retail media, the future of product discovery from a merchandising standpoint, and how things have to evolve. I don't think anyone realized that how much change would have to happen for these insurgent brands to really be successful in a much broader landscape.
You look at what's been going on for years now with insurgent brands, right? Brands that grew up in direct consumer, that maybe, I think of like the Native brand, one of our board members from the Native brand. And you think of these brands that formed up in D2C, found a good strategic retailer to work with. And now that brand is a very well-off brand at Procter & Gamble. That is at all retailers, that is growing consistently year after year. Insurgent brands have very much been a very active part of what we know as CPG and retail for the last, I don't know, 10, it feels like 10-ish years they've really taken off. Walk into a hair care aisle. I always tell folks in my company, walk into a hair care aisle and look at all the different brands you see in a hair care aisle. It's really dramatic how these insurgent brands have made such an impact.
Makeup's obviously another one, right? Very creator influenced in that regard. And I think what's fascinating to me is, it's interesting the scale of where these brands can go. And again, as an outsider, you hear the stories of, okay, if I'm a successful, call it a creator brand or emergent brand, I go from 0 to 5 million, and maybe I sell to a Thrasio, and Thrasio goes from 5 to 100 million, and you're like, holy crap. Like, I didn't even know some of the brands you guys had could do that, went from 5 to 100. And then you're talking about like Native gets acquired by Procter and Gamble or whatever it was, and goes from 100 million to $1 billion in global sales. And again, we went from 0 to 5 to $1 billion eventually. Like, I can see why this is a really fascinating and interesting category of business. Like, if you could take a $5 million brand and turn it into $1 billion brand, that's a pretty crazy outcome. And brands, holy crap, that's a word.
I think, yeah. So based on that, initially in the beginning of the conversation, you said, hey, we're not trying to be the next P&G or Unilever. The only other example I have of something like that would be Campbell's buying Sovos. And I think that was a house of brands concept. It's on the food side, which is what I'm more used to. And I always get a little bit turned off when I hear about those acquisitions, because then the packaging guys come in and be like, oh, we're going to have great new packaging. We're going to take all the good ingredients out. from that perspective, like thinking about successes and exits and things like what, how do you think about this? Because I'm assuming you have to think about this in the PE environment. So what does it look like? Are you building these brands up, as Todd was saying, 5 to 100 million? What does it look like in the end?
What does it look like at the end for Thrasio?
Yeah.
Or
What
any
are
of these
the,
insurgent
what are
brands.
the,
What is it?
yeah.
What's the landscape look like, and how does it? Is it just selling to a Procter and Gamble the goal, or can Thrasio? You're like, I don't want to exactly be Procter and Gamble, but is there a future to be something at that global scale, which again would be a hugely successful outcome? You could be a publicly
Yeah.
traded company.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, so multiple options for any of these. There are some that are built, I would say, pure as a start, build up, carve out. Okay. Um, you know, you've seen acquisitions for over the last handful of years. A lot of times they're a single brand. Maybe they build portfolio within that brand. Maybe they stick just to their thing, and they'll go and usually go to a competitive sale. There's also others. There's whole groups within private equity firms now that have companies that look similar to us, which are going to be multi-brand, multi-category, sold through multi-channels, maybe globally, maybe domestically. There's a couple of private equity firms that I watch, and they own some pretty strong brands, right? Okay.
Yeah. So one thing that I was interested in hearing you talk about Insurgent brands is the model has been, at least recently, it's been you have to grow up online and then you can come to the retailer. But previously to that, it was like you went to the retailer to audition for your product. And I think that's like the Shark Tank model versus the online model, or maybe you're doing both. But I would love to know, do you get to be an Insurgent brand forever, or like how do you look at this?
Probably difficult to be an insurgent brand forever because someone else is going to play that role against you as you get larger, right? I think there is a point where you turn from an insurgent to a strategic brand. However, I think the conversation about what makes a brand insurgent, right? So to me, I don't know, does insurgent brand actually have a definition to it? Not sure.
Yeah, you're talking about the D2C brands are always Insurgent until they get into the retailers at this point.
So the idea of how you get into retail, if first of all, you got to ask the question whether or not you want to be in traditional retail. And I think it's okay for some brands to not want to be in traditional retail. Okay.
Okay.
So again,
That's an interesting observation.
Yeah.
I think that's really worth exploring.
Yeah. So if you're a brand that does pretty well on its own, you're delivering to goals, you're in growing categories in a growing medium or a growing channel, depending on where you want to take that brand, maybe it's okay to keep that brand in a digital first space. Maybe you don't want to exit digital only until your fundamentals are right so that you can step into retail and continue on an upward trajectory of your brand, right? I don't think all brands are necessarily built to sit on a shelf that is not unlimited. Okay. So I'd say, first of all, it comes down to your decision on whether or not you see an opportunity to be in retail, right?
Maybe that some of those products are niche enough where it just doesn't make sense to be on a retail shelf.
That's right. But you can still run a very healthy business
Right.
off those. The second question comes to, how do retailers find brands now? I went back 10 years ago. I'll tell you that retailers were part of the innovation cycle years into or years prior to a brand being launched. Okay, so the retailers, the key retailers, were always going to be bought in the upfront, and they always knew what was coming. That was the day of old. We're not in that case. We don't have those same type of relationships, and we're not built off them. But what we do have is the ability to launch products on our time, right? Not on a retailer's time at this current point, to launch them on our time to the needs of the consumers that are willing to buy our product at the price that they're willing to buy our product with the packaging that they're willing to build the product, et cetera. It's very much I talk about a little bit like beta mode, right? So in tech, you think of beta as in that spot where maybe it's not fully locked, maybe it's not fully ready to go, but it's good enough and you can learn from it. We have some products in that space, and I actually enjoy that space. I think it's one of the best things about tech from my experience. was the idea that everything doesn't have to be perfect. Things can be right and you can evolve them, but it doesn't have to be perfect.
I think that's probably a good place to call it. I know that we didn't get this perfect, but I learned a lot. So thank you for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Dave. This is awesome.
Hey, thank you for making it to the end of the podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to The Middlemen, the easiest way to find us is to go to LinkedIn, search for The Middlemen Podcast, and follow us, because in all of our posts, we will share links to the episodes on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And we'd love for you to rate us on any of those services if you're so inclined. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you next time.